Hello, everyone. Welcome to Promethean Action's live question and answer show. Today's show is named The 50-Year Coup Fails, Trump Checkmates the Democratic Fascists. I have an intro lined up for you today. I think the two things I want to cover to start today's show is first, I think a lot of you know that Prince Andrew, now legally known as Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, was arrested on his 66th birthday. Oof, on suspicion of misconduct. It was specifically on his ties to Jeffrey Epstein, allegations that he shared confidential UK government information with the convicted sex offender when he was the British trade envoy. King Charles issued a statement expressing deepest concern while emphasizing that the law must take its course, with the royal family pledging its full cooperation. This marks the first arrest of a senior royal in centuries and represents another major blow to the monarchy amid the fallout from the Epstein ties. Interesting. But I think more significantly on the censorship front, we have this new thing called freedom.gov. Did everyone see freedom.gov yet? I'm just going to pull it up. So I think this website literally just went live in the last, 24, 48 hours. This is freedom.gov. So this is a State Department project, is developing an online portal under this name, freedom.gov. It's to counter government censorship, particularly in Europe. The site, it was registered last month, aims to let users access content legally banned locally, including material labeled as hate speech or terrorist propaganda, by potentially routing traffic through a built-in VPN-like function to make the traffic appear like it's originated in the United States. So now the Trump administration now is setting up this portal. We don't have any details yet. All we have is this freedom.gov, where they're going to be encouraging Europeans to come through this website and so they can access their social media as if they were in the United States. So this originally was supposed to be started at the Munich Security Council, that happened a few days ago, but it was delayed. The announcement just happened a few days ago. So it was delayed till after the Munich Security Council, and it was led by U.S. Undersecretary Sarah Rogers. Barbara, thank you for joining us again. Susan, thank you for joining us. Barbara, I think you wanted to say something on this freedom.gov thing.
Before Barbara says anything, I want people to look very carefully at what is above the I in is. It's Paul Revere. Just so you don't miss that.
Yeah, this is extremely important. It's part of an overall offensive, which Mike Benz has been covering in depth. And what's going on is that we are intervening in the free speech fight in Europe. And as people may be aware, what's happening is that they intend to use this. I'm sorry, I'm having a little bit of trouble with timeouts on my computer right now. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you. Yes, it's your video.
As soon as I finish this, I'm going to sign out and sign in again and see if that clears it up.
Do me a favor, just restart your internet router before you come back.
Restart my internet router?
Yeah, before you come back. That might be the problem.
Okay, all righty. At any rate, you know, what's going on is that you have an offensive launched by the State Department, which used to be at the center of our censorship industrial complex, which makes it ironic. And they're intervening right now to prevent Europe from censoring the 2026 and 2028 elections in the United States, which is their intention. So, you know, basically, this is a big deal. And people should be aware of it, watch it. We'll be reporting a lot on it.
Yeah, I'll just add while we're, Barbara's trying to get back in here, go back and look at the two speeches that were given to the Munich Security Council, J.D. Vance's last year and Marco Rubio's this year. Last year, J.D. Vance came down hard on this kind of censorship. And it's not like Marco Rubio didn't reference it in his speech, But I think he did something else at the Munich Security Conference, which I think is extremely important. You know, a lot of people were saying, well, he was holding out the olive branch to the Europeans. He wasn't as tough as J.D. Vance was the year before. But I think if you think about it a little different way, you're going to see what the Trump administration strategy is overall. I don't think he was addressing the elites in the room at Munich. I think he was addressing the people of the various European nations and saying, you're important. Our shared values, which you know better than we, are being trampled by your leaders, are something which is worth fighting for. And we cannot lose those values. So when you think of how he did that speech at the Munich Security Conference, and then you look at the launching of this platform, I think you can see that this administration is laser focused on dealing with the fascist censorship, which a very, very desperate oligarchy is trying to impose at this point.
Thank you, Barbara, and welcome back. Thank you, Susan. Welcome back, Barbara. And yes, everyone, this is going to be the next battleground is going to be over censorship. So this new, and we don't know exactly how it's going to work, but this potential new VPN-like service for the world so that they can access our social media, uncensored social, less censored social media is a big deal. Okay, so I'm going to begin here with the question and answers. It looks like, Barbara, your video disappeared again.
Yeah.
We understand why. Okay. So I guess we're going to get right into the question and answers. Everyone, if you're watching from YouTube, please drop us a like. It helps our distribution. Everyone watching us on x.com, thank you very much. Give us a quick share. Thank you for joining us. So the questions we're going to take right now that I'm going to start with are coming from our email newsletter subscribers. We just reached 100,000 email subscribers. We've done that in less than a year. I'd like to give a shout out to everyone watching this. Thank you so much for helping us grow to 100,000 email subscribers in a year. That's absolutely amazing. So thank you everyone for that. So these questions here are coming from our email subscribers. So which ones do you want me to start with, Susan?
Well, I think given the fact that the question of Andrew Mountbatten Windsor is on people's minds, why don't we take a couple of those first ones about the Epstein file?
Okay. All right. Yes. And I will definitely start with those. Okay. Let me get rid of that. There we go. Okay. So the first question here is from Jaylene. Thank you very much, Jaylene, for the question. How should we respond to people who become unsupportive or dismissive of the fight against the oligarchy because the Epstein files have produced what looks like clear smoking guns, yet there has been no meaningful prosecution or follow-through? We know this is the intentional misdirection by the British Empire's networks and their American assets, as you've shown with the Epstein as a dirty bagman and sex scandal psyop framing. But when friends and family say, if it was really that big, they'd have arrested people by now, how do we cut through that skepticism without sounding like we're making excuses? What's the most effective way to reframe the conversation so it actually strengthens support for the American system and Trump's economic revolution instead of letting the files become a demoralization weapon? Thank you, Jaylene, for your honest question and for your insight. And I'm going to pull it into this second question here. So thank you, Joyce, for this one. Regarding the Epstein questions, I'm convinced that at least some of these questions are from far left entities that infiltrate all media, podcasts, etc. It's just to keep our focus on that which is not essential to save our country. Epstein and company was a money laundering, pilfering global enterprise to further enrich private bankers who, by the way, probably controlled all intelligence operations. Thank you very much, Joyce, for your insightful comments. So, Barbara, I think you're still with us.
I'm with us, but I'm not going to turn on my camera right now because I appear to have a driver problem. So, I'm just going to leave it as is right now, and then we'll see if this clears up in a 5 minutes, 10 minutes or so.
Oh, okay, sounds good.
Look, here's the deal on Epstein. Everything that has been revealed so far primarily implicates the Democrats, and that's first and foremost what I think is being missed here. There's all sorts of crap out there about how Trump tried to block this and everything else, put forward by who? The Democrats. This is, what people are reacting to is the fact that they understand that somehow we've all been screwed for about the last 50 years. And this becomes a very convenient target to say, okay, the guy's clearly got a sexual problem. All sorts of people around him have sexual problems, mostly very rich middle-aged men who are very prone to this type of problem. What I've seen in the files so far does not convince me that after his initial conviction, he was involved in anything involving underage women. And there's substantial questions when you look at the files in terms of that. But what people are reacting to is the fact that he becomes like this mega cartoonish character to show you everything that's been wrong with your life in the world. Oh, how does he get away with this? Look at all this money that he didn't earn. Look at all this stuff that he did, etc. It becomes an image for our elites. And it is in many respects an accurate image. But what people are missing is I don't get all that outraged about the lifestyles of the rich and famous. In fact, most people actually indulge in that for much of their lives. They're into Hollywood, they're into entertainment, they're into all this stuff which is thrown at you about these people. What is happening here is a clear effort to suck the life out of what Donald Trump is actually doing and change the subject. I think people have to actually internalize this. It's an overall effort to change the subject. What's going on in Britain is a different story. All right. It's different than the United States. And in the British elites, pedophilia has been a characteristic for centuries, ever since Jeremy Bentham wrote his famous defense of pederasty. The things which are going on in Britain and the arrest of Prince Andrew, if you're actually looking at that context in the British framework, you'd say that Andrew is being thrown under the bus for the actual sins of the British Empire, which are far, far, far more hideous than anything Epstein was ever accused of when you actually get into it. So I'll leave the questions at that. And there's something that people have to understand here. The justice system right now in the United States is wrecked. It's wrecked on all sorts of levels. Since the early 1980s, and I can attest to this personally because of having lived through the prosecution of Lyndon LaRouche, it has become, from a political standpoint, a hit team. The same hit tactics that were used against Donald Trump have been used against others, LaRouche among them. These are when I wrote a piece called Robert Mueller is an amoral assassin. He will do his job if you let him. That is the character of the United States Department of Justice since the 1980s. This is a huge mess. The FBI being something that you could actually think about trusting. Give me a break after all of that, which we've actually observed over all of these periods. The judiciary is a mess, primarily caused by the education which people get in law school. And the whole idea here is that all elements of the actual Constitution and the actual study of law have evaporated out of the system because, basically the woke revolution, so-called, originated in the nation's law schools. That's where it came from. And then it penetrated out to the rest of society. So when you say, I want arrest, I want accountability. Well, suppose I want to arrest all the people involved in the frame-up of Donald Trump. Most of them live in Washington. most of their crimes occurred in Washington. The federal statutes for prosecuting crime say, therefore, the prosecution must occur in Washington. Washington has a brainwashed population at this point, and every effort which people have made to actually present grand jury indictments and other things have been rejected at the grand jury level. Think about that. Normally you say a grand jury would indict a ham sandwich. That's the famous, legal saying, okay? In Washington, D.C., in terms of these prosecutions, it ain't happening. The National Surveillance Court, the people overseeing FISA, just appointed the key person who set up the Ministry of Truth for censorship to be their lead amicus curiae in terms of issues around FISA. This is a corrupt and corrupted judiciary, and the only place where these things are getting resolved, and they are being resolved, is at the Supreme Court level, all right, if that. So we've got to think about this differently in terms of the immediate issue of accountability. We can't necessarily depend on the legal system to deliver justice. I think the question of whether this or that other Trump appointee within this slimy framework is competent, it would require something of a level of genius, which I think is probably out there somewhere, to clean it up. All right. But it is a major, major problem, which people are choosing to overlook by thinking, well, why can't they just go snap handcuffs on these people? It ain't going to happen. If I go out, say I go out and arrest John Brennan in Washington, D.C., it just isn't going to happen. The jury will acquit him. That's what happened in all of the Trump cases. The jury acquitted them because the population in Washington, D.C. is brainwashed with TDS. That's the reality of our situation, and that's what we have to think through when we talk about this situation of accountability. Are there things happening? You bet. There is a grand jury which is going on in Florida. They're looking at, a conspiracy charge based around the Mar-a-Lago raid. I think that's going to go somewhere. But, otherwise, if you're thinking that the legal system is going to, and using it in the way that's going on right now is going to work, it won't. With that said, I'll say certain things. The Freedom of Information Act is something that should be being used effectively at this point by the Trump administration to actually get at all of these files. There should be much more massive declassification going on of particularly the relationship between the Brits and the United States around Trump and around all sorts of things. And the people who are in those slots right now in the Department of Justice are not doing the job. So that's where I'll leave my comments there.
Yeah, I'll just add a slightly different angle to this thing, because I think what Barbara said is extremely important. First of all, the idea that you're going to get this justice system to deliver accountability is just not in this world at this point. So, rather than being cheerleaders, in the stadium, looking at the gladiators and the lions, let's figure out where you can actually cripple the structure that has created all of this evil, whether it's personal evil or whether it's the actual evil of the system. And it is important to look at the difference between what is going on in Britain and what is going on in here. Now, we're going to toot our own horn here. I think we were the first, back in September of last year, when the first Epstein file dump came, to identify the fact that the most important thing in that dump was the revelation that the British ambassador to the United States, Lord Peter Mandelson, was implicated up to his eyeballs in those files. And that forced his resignation immediately. But we targeted it before he actually resigned. And now look at what has come out subsequently. And this is where the stuff around Andrew, is coming out. It's all about the fact that these networks were running protection operations for the global financier elite. That's the issue. But do you see that in the United States? No. It's about how they ate babies on Epstein's island, and other kinds of things that are being pushed out there to keep people in a state of frenzy and outrage, but literally as if you're in the seats in the Roman Colosseum and you have no power to do anything except cheer one side or cheer the other. Both Jaylene and Joyce, I think, were very perceptive in their questions, because they did identify how this is being run as a PSYOP operation in the United States. And I would just ask people to think about it. Take this Roman Empire image and apply it to today. There was unspeakable evil in the Roman Empire. I'm sure we've all read something about it in our schooling, perhaps. Maybe not the younger people, but the older people have read about the unspeakable evil, the paganism, the persecution of the Christians, the sexual perversions, which go probably beyond what you're even reading about in the Epstein files. Now, you could have gone out and frog marched all the people immediately who were carrying out those things, if you could wave a magic wand and get, quote, accountability. But if you left the Roman Empire in place, it would start all over again with the next generation, the next class of these oligarchs. So what people have to think about is how you bring down the structures of evil. That's what creates this. It's structures of evil, which start with the idea that human beings are just animals. So of course you can do unspeakably evil things. A child is not an innocent, precious thing. A child is just a plaything for your evil impulses. It starts with that outlook. And that is the actual battle between the British imperial system and the American system. So for Jaylene, who's asking about how to deal with this, get back to me, let me know, but play with this idea. See how, if you can use this idea of the Roman Empire, because what was important historically is that the Roman Empire was brought down by Western Christian civilization. It wasn't just that it was evil. It wasn't just that you had to punish people who were evil. It was that you had to bring down the entire structure and replace it with something which cherishes and honors that which is human, whether it's in personal life or whether it's in your economic policy. Somehow we have to figure out how to shift the discussion to that. So I welcome people's feedback on this, because it has unfortunately been a fairly effective PSYOP within the MAGA movement at this point.
Thank you, Susan and Barbara. Thank you, everyone in the chat who's joining us on YouTube and x.com. Thank you for joining us today. These questions, I saw somebody in the chat saying how to ask a question. These questions here are coming from our newsletter subscribers. You can find a link to our email newsletter. The link is in the description. We have a daily email newsletter that you can subscribe to. So I also want to give a few quick shout outs here. To our friend Paul Trainer from Liverpool. Thank you for joining us today. Melody Hart, thank you every week for keeping the chat in line. I see the work that you do there. Thank you very much. And Chad Wumbolt has a quick question here, so maybe we could just give him a 30-second answer. Thank you for joining us, Chad. Thoughts on Teddy Roosevelt, please?
Barbara, do you have the bona fides there? I can categorize him generally.
Well, he was basically, run lock, stock, and barrel on a couple of things, which actually get very interesting. Think about the profile of the American as the British are actually looking at it from afar, and think about this kind of cowboy image, which, is central to, how Americans sometimes think about themselves. And he was very attractive from that standpoint. He appeared to be the epitome of the independent America. The reality was that he was run kind of lock, stock, and barrel by the British through his chief aide, Colonel House, and other people who were actually working to undermine the United States. And he came in specifically to, do exactly that. Susan could probably add to that, but was not a good Roosevelt. Let me put it that way.
Yeah, and it kind of reflects the way the British do things. Once they knock out the actual American tradition, which they did with the assassination of a whole series of Republican presidents, American system presidents, concluding with William McKinley in 1901, then they give you alternatives, one from column A and one from column B. So you have Teddy Roosevelt, who's a British agent of one characteristic. Then you have Woodrow Wilson, who's even more flaming British, agent, more from the liberal side of things. But neither one of them, or to put it in a different way, both of them were part and parcel of burying the American system and allowing for the establishment ultimately of the Federal Reserve and globalism where we are today. You're muted, Adam.
Thank you. None of your business. Thank you for your support. We are a viewer and a reader supported operation. Thank you for joining us today. And here's another quick question we can just do a quick moment on. What about Canada turning against the United States? Canada actually, yes.
It's not Canada, it's Mark Carney. I mean, it's the British control of the Canadian government. But as I'm sure there are many people on our chat today from Canada, and we see them in our YouTube chats all the time, Canada contains a whole lot of people who actually want to be part of the United States and support Donald Trump. So yeah, Trump knows he's going to have to deal with Mark Carney, who's sort of like the, leading figure right now in terms of globalists who know that Trump is reshaping the world. They can't run around and pretend that they're still completely in control any longer like they used to. And they're using Carney to sabotage Trump as much as possible. But I suspect that Mark Carney will meet his match when it comes to Donald Trump.
So Barbara's having some technical difficulties. Let me give this another shot. Barbara, can you try enabling your webcam again?
Let me try. Hopefully it has calmed down a little bit.
I think it's your internet connection, but. All right. Thank you very much. And Preston 5001, thank you very much. Please make sure you're subscribed to the channel. We do 3 political updates a week, plus this live show on Thursday. So thank you very much for tuning in. We really appreciate your support. Okay, so I guess I'm going to take the next question here, which is something that we were also discussing. Here's Barbara again. Let's see. Hello, Barbara.
Hello. Let's see how long this goes.
Okay.
Actually, I keep getting driver timeouts. I don't know what that means. There it goes again.
Okay, well, you should probably try restarting your computer first.
Right.
But, okay. Well, I'm going to take the next question here while we continue to work through these problems. Okay, I fear that the effort by the Trump administration to protect the elites, friends of Trump, from the Epstein disclosures, will cause American youth to give up on the party for being transparent to them and thereby lose the midterm elections. Thank you, Jim. This is one of the things that we get a lot from people and see on YouTube and on social media as a whole. So the youth vote, the male youth vote, very focused on Epstein and Trump. Is there a loss of trust there, Susan?
Well, from what I hear from people in that generation and people who are more in tune with that, there is a lot of anger. I mean, you can't just wave your hands and say it's not happening. There is a lot of anger. As I said before, it's being deliberately whipped up to focus it there. So I think that the real question is, how do you focus people on where their anger should be? Because I think where it comes from, especially from the younger generation, especially from younger men, in this crazy culture where, all men are oppressors, supposed to be oppressors, where they've had it with this, they've had it. But they're living in a world where they have been screwed economically. You know, if you're the average 20, 23-year-old looking at the world that you've inherited, you know, you could work 5 jobs, live in a studio apartment, still not make it, and, have no concept of how you could have a family, have a future. You're angry. You have a right to be angry. But to locate that anger simply on Donald Trump hasn't thrown all of his friends in jail. Well, frankly, most of Donald Trump's friends are not all that involved in this. As Barbara said, it is the Democrats. But put that aside for a moment. What you should be angry about is what has been consciously done to our society for the past 50 years, which both Barbara and I addressed in our recent shows, where the Council on Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission, laid out 50 years ago in the mid-1970s the explicitly stated intention to disintegrate our economy so that they could move toward globalization and to restrict our freedoms as Americans. They laid it out in black and white. Then they did it. So the world that people are living in, especially the younger generation, has never lived in anything other than a dysfunctional world, which was a deliberate policy choice, as Marco Rubio said in his speech to the Munich conference. I think what has to be done is constantly focus people, especially younger people, on, the system screwed you. And make clear to them what this system is. And they've experienced it. They've experienced it with the gutting of manufacturing, but mostly the younger generation experienced it with the 2008 blowout. And, the wipeout of, people losing their houses, people losing their savings, people losing their stability. The younger generation, sort of went through this period of massive instability, and nobody has been held accountable for that, which is why I come back to the fact that Mandelson, Andrew, and others are being hit for their role in saving the financial system is really where people's focus should be. And that what President Trump is doing with this administration, with the reinstitution of American system policies, rebuilding the middle class, rebuilding the working class, is he is taking dead aim at this system, the British imperial system, which is evil and it is criminal. And if he has the support of this younger generation, and obviously more broadly, and he has the mandate to continue this, the thing which they're really angry at is going to be dismantled. Again, I welcome people's feedback on this, because how we're going to communicate that effectively and potently to cut through this, because, again, the enemy knows its psychological warfare manuals. They know there's something real there. People are angry. They should be. And so they want you to be angry at this, which fundamentally will not change the system. So that's how I would answer that.
Barbara, welcome back.
Yeah, hopefully this will hold. Look, I think that Susan hit the key point. That the profile of intelligence agencies look at the population. They're watching what you say on the internet. They're watching all of this stuff, and they say, "Oh, look at this." Basically, people are really ticked, and they've seized on this. And let's feed it. Let's make it hysteria. Which they're very capable of doing, quite frankly. If you read a famous play by Arthur Miller called The Crucible about the Salem witch hunts, you will realize that profile has existed throughout history in terms of how you do this from a psychological warfare standpoint. All right. Now, what has Trump done in terms of economics? What threatens them? What he's doing is the same thing that FDR did. He's taking all of these people who have footholds in key industries, not Wall Street necessarily. He's trying to keep them satisfied and fat and happy and not worry about it at this point. But he's taking key people, particularly with Silicon Valley and with a scientific and engineering background, and he's saying, I need you, regardless of whether you hate me or not, to get in here and help us rebuild the United States. It's the same thing Franklin Roosevelt did during World War II and the World War II mobilization, where he took people like Henry Ford, like other people who thought he was a communist traitor, and convinced them to get on board and help rebuild the United States. In my humble opinion, this is what the other side, the people who are trying to destroy the United States, are running through the Epstein file at this point. They want to prevent that. Trump's friends, you talk about his friends in terms of this thing. The only person I've seen who has any cred with Trump is Howard Lutnick, who obviously told a fib because he basically was scared to death of what was going to happen to him. But Epstein was like a bomb going through this entire group of people in New York City and in Florida and in all of the places where the elites gather. And he basically has something to say about everybody. All right. It doesn't mean necessarily that the person being targeted here is in bed with raping little kids or eating them, as the Cywar thing is going on the internet. It doesn't mean that at all. And it's being used. And we got to stay focused on the thing which really matters, which is the economy. Can you explain what Trump is doing? All right. And the midterm elections, which one of the commentators just said. All right. This is a huge distraction. And I think that you have, as it's being played, I don't think that it's a distraction in terms of saying this was a bad guy. And he's tied to all sorts of other bad guys who were truly screwed people in the United States. That's all true. Was his primary crime involved with sex? I don't see it in the files, to tell you the truth, that have been released so far. What I see is pretty typical of Wall Street conduct in New York City. And I worked in some of those firms, so I'm pretty familiar with the atmosphere, the antics, and all that other stuff, and the culture. So that's the point, and it's working because people know they've been screwed, and they're not turning to the actual concrete remedy, which is right before them, because they think that economics and history is somehow outside their purview of understanding. And I think and there's a certain schadenfreude which comes from being a victim, and comparing victim notes with other victims. I think that that's part and parcel of what's going on here.
I like your Salem witch trial comparison there. And you have to think, with the internet and mass communication technologies, the ability to whip large groups of people across national borders into a frenzy. That's one of the downsides of the internet, is that it really is a tool of social control if you decide to use it like that. Thank you very much, Barbara and Susan. Barbara, I'm happy to see. I think your connection there is stabilized. That's great. All right, next question here is another super important one that I think we should address. Do you have a take on what's really going on with Steve Bannon? How does his pushing for the release of the Epstein distraction, then being found to be a close associate of Epstein, fit into the psyop you have brought to light? How does this confusing piece fit into the immense jigsaw puzzle? Is it all intended to split the Republican vote? Or are there deeper connotations? Thank you, Ratziel. And also, Gladys, very similar. How involved was Bannon with Epstein? Thank you very much. And these are the best questions. We get so many more that are similar.
Well, I'll take it up. I'm not particularly interested in casting, Steve Bannon completely out of the Trump movement. I think there are very legitimate questions being raised by people like Roger Stone, whose judgment I trust and know, about what actually went on with Bannon after he was fired from the White House. Now, remember what happened at that point, and he was involved in, he didn't come in as Trump's campaign manager from a clean background. He came in as a Ted Cruz supporter. And that's one thing you got to actually remember about Trump's first 2016 race. He came over to Trump after Cruz lost, And if you know Ted Cruz, you get a sense of the profile there. And then essentially what happens is Trump finds out that the Bannon is leaking all sorts of stuff to the author, Michael Wolff, who's writing a bad book, a horrible book about President Trump. And there are things in the Epstein files which are really, truly disturbing. Bannon seems to be talking to Epstein about using the 25th Amendment against the president at that point in time. In my humble opinion, that is really quite disqualifying. All right, that's really bad. Roger has a particular beef with him in terms of testifying one way during Russiagate before the House or the Senate, I can't remember which one, that nothing was going on with Roger Stone, and then turning around and becoming a government witness after the screws were put on him personally with his own prosecution, and he becomes a government witness against Roger Stone in the Mueller investigations. That, in my mind, is kind of saucy. And he doesn't end up really getting any time for a fraud conviction, which he pled guilty to around building the wall. How did that happen? So these are questions which Steve really does have to answer. He has to come clean about what this is about. Saying I was just attempting to make a documentary about Epstein at a point in time when I was broke, which is true, didn't have any sources of income. He got fired from Breitbart right after he got fired from the White House because the Mercers didn't want to support him anymore. So he didn't have any source of funds. He was going bankrupt, and he had been discredited by the White House itself. So he's a desperate man. Desperate men do many, many things. And he's a flawed man, but God help us, many of us are flawed. So I'm not ready to cast him out of the movement. I am saying he really does have something to explain here.
Yeah, and I would, I would really encourage people to stop, trying to compile a report card on each one of these people one way or the other. How much should you be paying attention? I mean, use the litmus test that we're trying to establish in this. Whoever it is, I don't care who it is. I don't care if it's Steve Bannon, Tucker Carlson, Michael Flynn, or, even people who are, 100%, loyal with the president and so on. Are they telling you what you need to know to take this country back? Are they teaching you about the American system? Are they making clear that the enemy is the British imperial system, rebranded as globalization? Are they giving you the tools to go out and organize non-traditional Republican voters to vote Republican in the midterm elections? And if they're not doing that, why are you paying so much attention to them?
Thank you very much, Susan. Yes, Barbara, I think it's good to note we're all, that's the nature of humanity, is that we're all flawed and imperfect. Only the creator is perfect. And the prophet. Yes, that would be Jesus. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining us in the chat. Thank you very much. We appreciate, especially the returning viewers. We have a much better chat every week. We have less disruptions going on there. And if you're watching on YouTube, please give us a like. If you're not subscribed, please hit the subscribe button. We do the 3 political updates a week, plus this live show every Thursday. So thank you very much. Also, x.com. Thank you to our friends on X. Yes, you've been driving a lot of traffic. I'd like to give a few thanks here. Thanks to, thank you very much, friend. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. Here's a quick one from Ram Luxama. Yes, thank you very much for joining us. Very briefly, any documentaries or movies that you ladies have been watching that you just want to give a shout out to? I didn't watch it yet, but I was told that the Melania documentary was half decent.
Well, one documentary that I noticed, actually, I think somebody in the chat brought up this week or last week, which is a very good history of how the British set up this deregulated financial system going back to the 1960s.
Oh, I think I heard of this too.
It's called Spiderweb, which I believe you can access for free. by looking for it on the web. But we should perhaps repost a documentary that we did years ago, which name just flew out of my head, Barbara, our long one that has over 1 million views.
1932.
1932, which is really a very important documentary because we present, I think, in a fairly artistic way, the battle between the American system and the British system going up to the presidency of Franklin Roosevelt. I think it's important because Franklin Roosevelt has been demonized by the British, not that he was perfect, but there's a lesson embedded in the Roosevelt administration, which we build up to using the sweep of American history, and we build up to it to give you, I think, a fairly good hands-on picture of what the American system versus the British system is. Those are two that immediately spring to mind.
Yeah, I think that some of Oliver Stone's work is very much worth actually looking at in terms of the present situation. Ukraine on Fire will really give you an understanding of everything that's going on around that war and why it's happening. Not as in depth as we would put it, but nonetheless a pretty good introduction.
And then one other book we've mentioned quite a bit. It's not a documentary, but it's a book, and it's a quick read, which I think is really foundational for people to understand this in a very accessible way, is Richard Poe's book, How the British Created Communism and Blamed It on the Jews. That is a very good history of the 19th and 20th century.
Thank you very much, ladies. I'd like to give a shout out to Bobby Tandowd. New subscriber, love the show and hearing facts. Keep up the great work. Have a nice weekend. You have a nice weekend too. Make sure you're subscribed, and we have a free newsletter. The link is in the description. Thank you very much and welcome aboard. And Anthony Peterson, thank you for joining us again this week. Rubio's speech was relevant and on point. Anti-Trump syndrome is still plague-like in my friend's mind. Can't convince all people, but most people can be fooled. Thank you very much, Anthony Peterson. Yes, this is a big. We get so many questions about this. People trying to educate their friends and family and just how hard it is. It's a very common theme. So to keep working at it and find people that you can actually dialogue with, even if it's on something small. Dialogue is what eventually leads to negotiation and settling very challenging things. It does start with a dialogue, though. Thank you very much.
Maybe this is a point that we should bring this up, because this is a tool for discussing with your friends and neighbors. Taking off our Promethean action hats, which is our policy arm, and putting on our Promethean PAC hats, which is our political action committee, geared to intervening directly into the electoral process in 2026. Promethean PAC has just released this new half-page flyer, which is entitled President Trump's Republican New Deal. And we chose that name directly. First of all, the president said it in a recent cabinet meeting. So it's very paradoxical for people. But I think it captures what the president is doing and saying, which is, I am completely changing the system. But the important information on the back, which I think is a way to start conversations, is breaking news. America is back in the black. And let's just try, without even showing people the Trump side, perhaps, show them the back side and show them that for the first time in 27 years, America produces more steel than Japan because of the tariffs, or that we've opened up facilities that had been dormant in the United States for decades, like an aluminum smelter, first one we've opened up in 50 years in the United States, or a graphene mine processing plant, first one in 70 years. And the idea of this is to try and give people a sense that, to make conscious for them, you have been living in a dark age. And when you live in a dark age, it does really bad things to your mind, but there is a pathway out of this dark age where you could have a productive, prosperous, stable future, where your children and your grandchildren could have a productive, prosperous, and stable future. So the idea of this new half-page flyer, and Adam has put on the website the short code for it. You can also go to the Promethean PAC website where it's the featured item there. Is for people to get copies of this and start having these kinds of discussions. It's my contention, and again, I want people to let me know if I'm right or wrong, that if we have more discussions with people about the economic promise that is out there, about the fact that, yes, you have been screwed and you have a right to be angry, but this is what you're really angry about. Your ability to be a productive, independent person was taken away decades and decades ago, and we want to give it back, and here's the first fruits of giving it back. I really would dearly appreciate people's feedback in terms of whether this is effective or not. So you can get, multiple copies of this flyer on our website, and get out there and start organizing.
Thank you, Susan. And Barbara is the treasurer of Promethean PAC. All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and those in the chat. I see your chats. Thank you. Okay, so I guess we can move to the next question. I guess the next one is going to go along. We're going to stick on this domestic issues for now. So this one is about I'm almost certain it's the Republican Party that this person is responding to. Let me take away this other banner here. Okay. Why are they not doing a better job of communicating all the amazing advances they've been making to the general public to help promote the midterm so that they can continue 2 more years? Thank you, Peter, for the simple observation. Barbara and Susan, your thoughts?
Well, the only real channel they have which has a wide audience other than the people who swear off mainstream media altogether and go on the internet, and in fact, that's what they're going to depend upon for the midterms, is Fox. Now, Fox structures all the stuff around the hot button Bush Republican Party social issues. I have not heard on Fox or any of the dominant shows anybody actually talking about the American system of economics, which is at the center of this entire program by the Trump administration. So the problem is that everybody thinks about economics wrong. They think about it from the standpoint of monetary theory. They think about it from the standpoint of Wall Street. What Trump is doing is he's rebuilding infrastructure. He's rebuilding energy. He's rebuilding it on the highest level possible in terms of 20 years into the future, something that is sustainable. And, that is difficult to communicate because everybody is sort of focused constantly on what's going on Wall Street. And you see Trump drift into this because that's what people generally discuss. They're not used to discussing, wow, this project just went in here. How many jobs is that? What's the impact overall on the national economy from a physical standpoint? As Elon Musk likes to say, basically we're changing, how people work by focusing on physics, i.e., does it actually work for real in terms of reality, versus software, which in many respects in the computer industry, it's just a lot of code being realigned with code, just like Wall Street is a bunch of meaningless paper being thrown around with a lot of meaningless paper. This is a different reality. And they're having trouble communicating it because most of the people communicating it, except for Jameson Greer, except for Scott Bessent, except for critical people in the cabinet, actually don't know about the American system. Peter Navarro knows about it backwards and forwards. He's communicating it. But, the difficulty is crashing right up against what most people think about as economics and what's covered every day in the media as economics. All right. Think about the last time that anybody came up to you and said, wow, A nuclear power plant is going in here. What do you think the impact of that's going to be on the economy in this area? How is that going to work? That discussion doesn't really exist in people's minds yet. That's what we're talking about. That's what we're communicating. But everything has been set up, really in terms of even how people think axiomatically. Most people still think that men and women are bestial in some sense. They don't really get it, that what Trump is talking about is a completely different image of human beings. We're made in the image of God, the Creator, and our job here on earth is to perfect increasingly his creation. That's not what's at the center of how anybody talks about economics or what the administration is doing. So that's how I'd answer it. We're colliding with 50 years of miseducation and more in terms of the American system. And we've got to basically come up with, which is why Susan is asking you to actually talk about the half-page flyer and the other things we're doing. We're as urgent and focused as anyone on figuring out how to communicate these things, because it is going to be the difference in the midterms. People are not necessarily going to feel, which is how this thing is being, played at this point. People have to feel it in order to vote. Are they going to be able to? Well, if you got half the world trying to crap all over what Trump is doing and pulling all the strings to actually crash the economy, then you got a real problem unless people understand fully and physically what the perspective actually is. And that's what I'd say about answering the question.
Yeah, I also add, I think they know it. I mean, J.D. Vance said it in an interview a couple of weeks ago. We have to get our messaging better. And then there was a report that a couple of days ago, there was a strategy session between about, I guess, 50 to 75 people, including people from the White House, people from the Hill, on the messaging that has to be done for the midterms. And according to the reports from that meeting, it was totally focused on the economy. Now, I think you might begin to see a little bit of an indication of how they're trying to do that. I saw a report from Maria Bartiromo the other day where she had the head of the National Association of Manufacturers. The banner headline was $17 trillion coming into the United States, manufacturing boom. I think they're trying to spin up their messaging a little bit better. Honestly, we have to say they're a little late to the party, because this is what we've been saying for the last year. And we're going to continue to say it louder, frankly, and probably better than they do. So, continue to help us get this message out ourselves.
Thank you, Barbara and Susan. Also, thank you to Karen for joining us today. Make sure you're subscribed. Thank you, Martin Gonzalez. We really appreciate the support. And Renee Fetters, thank you for your insight and factual information. Thank you for joining us. I think I just asked you to make sure you're subscribed to our channel here. We also have a free newsletter. We did a survey. We know a lot of people don't like that we send emails basically every day. I am slowly working towards building another subscription where you can get like digest emails. We'd send 2 or 3 a day. So yes, everyone, your comments were heard.
I think you meant to say 2 or 3 a week.
Yes, I'm sorry. Yes, I did. Thank you, Susan. Yes, 2 or 3 a week. We're going to be sending 2 or 3 a week, not 2 or 3 a day. 2 or 3 a week. Yeah. Well, if there are a certain amount of people, there were people that said they like the once a day format. There's still like over 25% of people still like the format. So we're working to getting some other subscription options, but so at least get our free newsletter. I'll be bringing up more details about this in the newsletter moving hopefully soon in the next few weeks. So thank you very much for joining us today.
Somebody wants 20 per day.
20 per day? Well, hopefully we're going to, I think the multiple times a day stuff really, in my mind, is better suited for social media. I think that's where posting 3-4 times a day, people kind of expect it more. I think maybe once or twice a day is kind of a limit. 20 is a little extra. Thank you, everyone, for your support. We really appreciate it. We can't do any of this without your help. Very much so. Okay, next question. This is one from last week, but we still keep getting asked about it, and I think it's important to understand. Would love to hear you speak on the part of Jameson Greer's Davos speech, where he seems to talk about John Maynard Keynes in a positive light, when my understanding is that Keynesianism was essential to central banking and the Fed. Seems a glaring incongruity in the overall speech. Can you explain this? Thank you. Thank you, Max, for your honest question. Barbara and Susan.
Well, you know, he's correct that John Maynard Keynes was not a good guy, all right? But it's typical of economics education in the United States that nobody's really being educated on the American system. Nobody's, you know, I think Jameson actually discovered it both from his own work in college and his apprenticeship during the first Trump administration to, you know, Trump's initial trade advisor at that point, who was a complete advocate of the American system. So I'm not like, you know, people who are running around saying, oh my God, this disqualifies him because he made a mistake about the fact that John Maynard Keynes was evil, all right? It's an air of what you'd expect from any kind of academic education in economics in the United States at this point. And I'm quite certain, given Jameson's overall thrust and his overall capabilities, that that air will be corrected over time. So that's how I'd explain it. You know, you don't find many standard economics courses that actually say John Maynard Keynes was a fascist jerk, which he was, but that's not how it's taught. All right, that's not how it's taught in conventional education. Period.
Yeah, and I'll just add, you know, I mean, you look at other people like Scott Bessent or the new Fed chair, Fed chair appointee Kevin Warsh. You know, you look at some of their writings in terms of 20th century monetary policy, you know, and the people that they like in the 20th century. And you sit there and you say, But, you know, what I think we're seeing, you know, in a certain sense is, let's just forget about the 20th century, because it was a system which was thoroughly infected with British liberal economic thinking. And by that, I mean both free trade, Austrian school, and Keynesianism on the other side. They're just two binary choices within the world of British liberal philosophy. So anybody, as Barbara said, who was trained in the 20th century is going to probably choose from one of those two buckets. I think what's important is that you have an administration which is saying, look, whatever, you know, we believe in terms of the formalities and the structures of the 20th century, that didn't work. And we had to go back further. And they've gone back to the 18th and the 19th century, to the American system, and said, wow, this works. And they're trying to figure out how to recreate that in 21st century terms. And of course, I'm sure they're going to continue to use 20th century economist references like Friedman or Keynes or whoever, and, you know, all of them, Volcker. You know, I think Bessent thinks he's the greatest Fed chair of the 20th century. Well, I definitely part ways with Scott Bessent on that one. But I think it's just this fact that the 20th century was so badly infected. And the most important thing that this administration is doing is saying, hey, we're going back to the 19th century. And we're going to figure out how to recreate that in modern terms.
Thank you very much, Susan. I want to answer somebody's question really quick. So Grand Pedo Vic, thank you. Do you have membership to join? I don't see one if you do have one. Thank you for all of what you do. Okay, so let me clarify. We shared a link just a little bit in the stream ago. That link was to Promethean PAC. Okay, we have two organizations. We have two organizations because of the way the political organizations are designed in the United States. Okay, our main organization that's kind of doing the YouTube videos is called Promethean Action. Okay, the link to subscribe to get a membership to Promethean Action, you can do that by getting our newsletter. When you get our newsletter, you can be a completely free subscriber. You can be a free member to our newsletter completely free. And we offer some membership options for people that wish to support us on a daily basis. Promethean PAC it's a technical federal political action committee, which means that it can directly deploy against or for political campaigns. So we save the PAC for things that we're directly doing on campaign issues, like the midterm campaign issues. Promethean Action is an educational organization. Promethean Action, we can take support from international supporters. That's why we can do the show and we take contributions from international supporters, not a problem through Promethean Action. Promethean PAC, that would be a problem. But Promethean Action, we have no problem. We have plenty of people from the UK, from Australia, from Canada that are part of our newsletter that give us So Promethean Action is kind of like our wide educational arm. Promethean PAC is really dialed in for the elections. We have a membership product. I don't want to say too much about it yet, but I am working on a membership product for Promethean PAC. So I'm working towards that. So if you want to kind of support us and get up to the minute emails, just get our free newsletter. The link is in the description. So I think that should answer your question. Let me just do a few other thank yous. Thank you, Chad Wambold, for joining us. Can we stop calling the globalist news the MSN or the legacy news and start calling it the oligarch news? In my opinion, anything we can do to destroy the brand of corporate news, including Fox, will help. I 100% agree.
Yeah, we're with you.
We'll all agree. I am a complete outlier. I literally watch no corporate news. So yes, I agree. Thank you, Chad, for joining us every week. Noel, thank you. Thank you, guys. We need live events and arenas. Okay. When we get to 10,000 live viewers, then we'll get an arena. We're getting close to doing 3,000 to 4,000 a week now. Thank you for joining us. Make sure you get our free newsletter.
And that is what the president does. And he is pledged to hit every single state this year in 2026. I think he's in Georgia today. Yes. Live events. Yes. And it's true, live events, there's no substitute from one of these live events. If any of you, I'm sure many of you have been to Trump events, the overlying characteristic of a Trump rally, and it doesn't matter if you got there 6 hours early and it was freezing cold or it was blistering hot and you were in line for 6 to 8 hours, one overriding characteristic everybody says is everybody's happy. So those are good for the soul, despite the fact that they're kind of physically trying, but they're good for the soul.
I'd like to give a quick shout out to Peter of Canada. Thank you, our friends up north, for joining us. I know we share, even though our histories are different, there is so much cultural overlap between the United States and Canada. Thank you for joining us so much. Make sure you're subscribed, get our free newsletter. And our friend Ram Luxama, thank you very much again. Is a job market rigged to hire unproductive and lazy people? Many productive people with experience are rejected or being worked out of their job. Well, here in the United States, AI is now working people out of the job. And
where you have shortages is in skilled trades. So if anybody wants to get a good job, look at the trades.
So around here, so everyone that works in the skilled trades in this area works in the data centers.
Well, there are other skilled trades jobs.
Yes, there's plenty of them. Automobile mechanic in the United States is still massive shortage of automobile mechanics in the United States. Ram Luxana, I would say personally, this may be your chance to start looking at becoming an entrepreneur. I know it's a very scary journey, but looking at those options, figuring out how to build a business, and with social media now, with good product, your reach can be anywhere in the world with social media marketing, with content, social media marketing. So I would start looking into that, see what content you can produce, build an audience, and you can bring products and services to your audience. So I don't want to oversimplify it too much, but that's what I would suggest. Laura Dickinson, thank you so much for your support. Please make sure you're subscribed to our channel. And Jennifer, thank you. Donated for the flyers. I've got a mailing list for the Democrats and independents who could use this information.
Good idea.
Thank you. Thank you. there is still, right, probably in the single digits, there are still people out there who are honestly looking for the truth, that haven't fully made up their mind, that haven't like directly set themselves in the other camp. And these are the people we really need to be identifying and having serious discussions with, are the peoples whose minds haven't been completely locked up by social media and the corporate news. Thank you very much for joining.
Yeah, the other area I think is important, since you bring that up, Adam, is a lot of people who voted for Trump and are being disoriented right now by the psyops, by the outrage, by the fact that maybe they're not feeling the economics yet, although I think once the tax refunds and other things start coming in, that may change a little bit. But I think it's extremely important for people to think about how I can reach the people who voted for Trump, who are now a little bit squishy. Those are the ones we got to make sure we bring back into the fold, because those were the margins, you know, the non-traditional voter, Republican voters, those are the margins that delivered it in 2024. And those are the margins we've got to get back in there in 2026.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Jennifer, for joining us and sending in your report there. Appreciate it. Okay. I guess we're going to just take the next one here. Toward the end of William Wirtz's Core 5 presentation a few days ago, he mentioned the Import-Export Bank, which is funding the Vault rare earth mineral project. He also mentioned another federal bank. I gather these are part of the American system. Can you tell us more about each bank, who runs it? How do they differ from each other? What else do we need to know about them? Thank you. Thank you, Barbara, for your question. And I'm going to roll it into this one here, which is similar. Thank you, Monica, for bringing this up. The book you're referring to, Alternatives to Monetary Disorder. What is this about, and why do you connect it to Rubio's speech? Why was it written, and why and how did everyone decide it was a good idea to industrialize? Thank you very much, Monica, for your question. So Barbara and Susan, your thoughts?
Well, Alternatives to Monetary Disorder was one of 30 books that were produced in the 1970s by the Council on Foreign Relations under their Project 1980s, or their 1980s project. And it was essentially the blueprints that they were mapping. Stop and think of the timing. 1971, we ended the Bretton Woods system. We took the dollar off the gold reserve standard. Essentially, we decoupled our currency from our economy. And we said our currency can now be a plaything of the speculators. So it was the first step toward loss of economic sovereignty. And the people in the Council on Foreign Relations, and then they had the spinoff, the Trilateral Commission, which Barbara referenced in her show yesterday. They said, all right, well, now we've laid the basis. Now we need a forced march toward globalization, and which is another name for imperialism. And the central tenet of this, which is why everybody decided it was a good idea, not everybody did, a lot of industrial workers, and we fought it, tooth and nail all along, is people buy into this silly notion that you measure economic health from the standpoint of how much money you have. So they sell you a bill of goods. Oh, you can buy stuff cheaper if we make it in some country where the labor is cheaper. And people bought into that. In the 1990s, not everybody. And, first our ruling class bought into it, and they convinced enough people with, to go along with NAFTA, although there continued to be a lot of opposition to it. And that is the deindustrialization, where you ship your manufacturing to the place where the wages are the lowest, which is poor third world countries. And as we all know, we hollowed out our working class and our middle class because of that. And the fact, what I keep coming back to is the fact that Rubio said deindustrialization was a conscious policy decision. I think that's extremely important that he said that. We've been saying it for 50 years, but here the Secretary of State came out and said this was a conscious policy decision. And we, using our historical memory, were able to say, yeah, and here's where they said it in black and white 50 years ago and proceeded to do it. So that's how I'll answer that question. If you want to bounce back to the first one, if Barbara wants to take a crack, or I can, up to her. on the Exim Bank.
Barbara, any thoughts on this question before? Yeah.
Yeah, I can't remember what he referenced in addition to the Import-Export Bank, but whatever it was, basically, and whatever its legislative mandate was initially, all of these things exist as instruments of our government, all right? And they can be repurposed. In most respects, I think both banks here had a good purpose to begin with, and then they got corrupted by the dominant governments and dominant monetary policies which existed at that point in time. What Trump is now doing is he's looking for the instruments to actually implement the American system policies he's talking about. He's talking about how do we generate the credit which can actually make the economy grow. How do we get around Wall Street, which is what I think is part and parcel of his strategy, to actually run the American system in the way I want to run it. And he's picking up and he's repurposing all sorts of things to meet that goal. And I think that's what needs to be understood about what Will was talking about and what these banks actually are, rather than the formalities which have existed over time.
I think the other bank might have been the International Investment Bank, which is something that the Pentagon is using more so. But what's interesting about the way they're using the Exim Bank is, first of all, it's now got its largest tranche of funding ever, $10 billion of federal money going into the bank, and then it's being backed up by another $10 billion, and it's being backed up by another $2 billion from private investments. So you've got a $12 billion fund, and the purpose of it is to purchase strategic minerals, rare earths, the kinds of things that we've been held hostage to because we didn't produce any of them here, to purchase them, process them, have a bank of them, and then private industry comes to the Exim Bank and says, well, I'm going to need this particular mineral. I'm going to need this particular rare earth. They lock in a price, which is set by the Exim Bank. So it's not going to be fluctuated. It's not going to be undercut by China or some other country. It really is classic American system. It's a public-private partnership, which says this is a vital sector of our economy. We have to make sure for our national economic security that these things are being produced, they're available to American manufacturing, and we're going to create the infrastructure to ensure that we are not going to be held hostage to, some free trade nonsense, which is never free, and it just means some other country or some other institutions in the world have you by the throat because they've undercut you and they've cornered the market. So it's a really interesting way that they're using the Exim Bank. And we'll have to bone up on the other bank, if you need any further details, but it's a good question. Thank you.
Okay, next question I'm going to take is going to be on the UK, and people have already been mentioning this in the chat, but I'm going to bring it up right here. Thank you, Keith. I have two questions. I think people definitely want to hear us at least talk about this a tiny bit. What do you think of British MP Rupert Lowe's new political party, Restore Britain? His announcement sounded very Trumpian. Thank you, Keith. And thank you, Terry. Today, I just watched a video of a gentleman from England who is starting a new political party there. I thought his idea was brilliant. I think we should do an action here in the US, much like he's suggesting, to ensure the upcoming November elections. Do you think we could do such an action here in America? Restore Britain launched February 26th by Rupert Lowe from Great Yarmouth. Thank you, Terry, for your question. Barbara and Susan, I know we were discussing this right before the show.
Well, I'll start. I don't feel comfortable in terms of coming down firmly one way or another in terms of what's going on domestically in other countries, because we're not there. I'm here on the ground, and if I tried to evaluate what was going on in politics just from what I was seeing in the media or even watching somebody's speech, I know that I would not really understand what was going on. We understand what's going on because we're in the battle hourly and daily. So all I want to say about this is people that I work with and talk to in Britain have their concerns in terms of whether or not Rupert Lowe is the real deal. I can't say any more than that because that's what they said yesterday in an interview that I did with them. I would say the jury is out. But on a more general standpoint, I would say that what I see often missing in most of the so-called opposition, whether it's in Canada, whether it's in Australia, whether it's in Great Britain or other countries, is it is a understandable nationalist reaction to, the globalist effort to obliterate national identity. And obviously what Lowe is very focused on is the question of unfettered immigration. And, he's going much further than the Reform Party in terms of, getting the illegal immigrants out and so on. And I'm sure there is a very, very strong response to that within the British population, which has had it with this virtual invasion. So I'm sure there's going to be a certain level of support for that for understandable reasons. But what I seldom see in these opposition parties is any kind of understanding of how do you actually run the economy? How do you actually rebuild your society? How do you actually create a functioning culture and society which can advance your nation as a sovereign nation into the future? That's usually pretty much missing in most of these upstart opposition parties, which is why I think my friends are saying the jury is still out at this moment. But that's about as far as I would go at this point.
Yeah, I think Susan's correct. I don't think we can make a judgment at this point. It's an interesting development. I think that's about what we can say. For people who don't know, Rupert Lowe is the guy who personally and privately financed the investigations which are going on into the Pakistani rape gangs in Britain and the cover-up of them by the British government, which implicates not only Keir Starmer, but also Gordon Brown. And as I said, when talking about this subject earlier, if you think Epstein is a big deal, where do you actually see what's gone on by the City of London for decades and decades and decades, because the elite in many respects is inherently corrupt. But, I have to look at this from the standpoint that the British are experts in creating controlled opposition. People who go out and poll and pick up what people think is the major issue when there's something actually underneath that, which is far more important, which is how are you structuring your economy and how is that coherent with your fundamental definition of what men and women are actually here on earth for. The fundamentals, in other words, rather than the efflua which come from social change in various respects. So let's see what happens. But as I said before, I'm really hesitant to come down on anything in Britain, given the history of controlled opposition and how they run things. They plant and create, just like the old Roman pantheon, which is how they model themselves. They model themselves after the Roman Empire. And in Rome, you could have any religion you wanted, as long as it didn't threaten fundamentally the empire. And they used it as a social control mechanism. And that's much like what I see going on in most British politics.
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you, Fenderman, for joining us again. Next question I'm gonna take is back on the domestic situation. So I think this is a good segue. How likely is it that Trump will end the Federal Reserve? And if so, maybe before the midterm elections? I think it's a little pushing it before the midterm elections, but Barbara and Susan, your thoughts?
Yeah, I definitely lay money on the fact that he's not going to end it before the midterm elections. You can take me up on that. And honestly, I'd be surprised if he could make any kind of that dramatic move, even if we get through the midterms strongly in his administration. what I've said before is I think that what's important is you see this administration kind of setting up parallel ways of doing what a national bank or national banking did in the 19th and the 18th century. And I think that's the most important thing. We've got to figure out how to create 21st century versions of American system banking. And that's not so obvious. It's one of the reasons I'm glad Scott Bessent is in there and some of these other people, because they know from the inside how this 21st century financialized system operates. It's extremely complicated. And I don't think you can just turn the switch off the Federal Reserve in any way, shape, or form until we begin to actually have a fairly competent idea of how are we going to change to a national banking system. So I think you're going to kind of see parallel structures there for quite a while. That's my sense of it.
Thank you, Susan. Okay, this next question is going to come from our friend and acquaintance, Kirk. Deindustrialization. Thank you, Kissinger, who believed capitalism would bring the Chinese into the world of Western democracies.
Yeah, for people who don't know, that's Kirk Wiebe, a longtime friend of mine, and a former analyst with, Bill Binney at the National Security Agency, who walked out appropriately over the mass surveillance programs, instituted in the 2000s. I have to correct him just a little bit, however, in terms of Henry Kissinger. Henry Kissinger may have said that, but what he was really up to was trying, he believed in so-called great power, politics and putting people off against one another in the true British method. Kissinger, for those who don't know, confessed to actually being a British spy in a speech at Chatham House, where he openly said that he kept the British government more informed of his activities than even the President of the United States. And what this was about at the time that it was done was hopefully trying to capture the Chinese and split them from the Soviet Union to create kind of a great power rivalry, if you will, at the same time as he's doing what Kirk said, to turn the Chinese into the capitalist workshop of the world as our country was actually being rapidly deindustrialized. None of that worked out so well because it was all based, as Marco Rubio said, on a level of absolutely clear delusion about the state of the world and about the state of various cultures in the world. I think Trump has a much more realistic approach to all of this by saying, hey, we can't be dependent on anybody. We're not going to get involved in globalization. We're not going to get involved in this idea of, a cheap labor factory in China that debases China as well as the United States. And we're in a completely different relationship at this point. And Trump believes in sovereign nation states. Kissinger didn't necessarily ever believe in that. He was a globalist through and through, his entire reign. So that's where I'd leave it. And thanks, Kirk. Glad to see you. Oh, another good movie, by the way, just to, on this particular thing, is people should really, if they want to know about the 2000s and 2001 and surveillance, there's a movie called The Good American, which deals with Bill Binney and his absolute heroism with Kirk and exposing what Cheney and Bush were actually up to with 2001.
Thank you, Barbara.
Adam, I saw something in the chat which I do want to address. Someone said, I will vote when the machines are gone. I just have to say, that's like saying, I will fight when the other side voluntarily surrenders. I mean, seriously?
Just to put a fine point on it, we had a major vote fraud experienced ourselves in New Hampshire in 1980 with paper ballots. Okay, and I'll tell you, I sat through a recount in which the ballots had been printed so new that when you tried to hold them in your hand, the static electricity made them fly across the room. So, there can be fraud with paper ballots also. The question is the integrity of the people counting the vote and the integrity of how you're setting up the entire operation.
And whether you make it too big to rig, as we did in 2024 with machines.
Okay, I'm going to take a few interesting super chats here. Thomas Jason, thank you for joining us. Low is a head fake nationalism. There is no door number 2. Well, it depends what kind of nationalism you're talking about. What we're trying to do in the United States here under the Trump movement is a nationalist movement. So I don't know.
I appreciate his comment that he's a head fake. I think there are people who think that, but I think I think with a lot of these people, you just have to see how it plays itself out. And again, keep your metric the right metric. What is the standard you are actually holding them to? Not just outrage, but how do we solve these problems fundamentally?
Okay. Thank you, Thomas. Thank you for joining us. And I'm going to take these two together, and then I'm going to take two on American credit, which similar kinds of questions here. What are your thoughts on a Bitcoin sovereign reserve, and will that help us rid us of the Federal Reserve System? And then I'm going to take this one here from Anthony again. Will Bitcoin/digital currency be a threat or a benefit to the American banking economic system? This is tough. I'm not a super big investor. I'm not a super Bitcoin person, but this is a general question. Can we use Bitcoin? Is there something useful about Bitcoin that could potentially replace the Federal Reserve in the future? Barbara and Susan, your thoughts on this one?
Well, I think the Trump administration is developing a pretty good, situation with Bitcoin, in that they're actually talking about that it has to be dollar denominated, which I think is really critical. A lot of people are looking for, an escape hatch. And you got to think about the question that Donald Trump asked Scott Bessent when he was asking him to be Treasury Secretary. And he basically said, here's what I want to ask you, Scott. Here's Wall Street over here, and they have a lot of power, all right, in terms of the present economics. Here's my system over here where I'm trying to rebuild the American economy. How do we prevent, Wall Street or enemies abroad, which, all of our economies are all tied up with these international systems, from crashing the United States and crashing, you've got exposure all over the place on Wall Street, huge amounts of derivative tradings, vastly, outnumbering anything that's being produced in the overall economy. That could be blown up. All right. The question is, will they actually go to that, and how do we defend ourselves against it? So I think what Scott Bessent is trying to do is to answer the president's question by balancing things, by, as I said before, keeping Wall Street a little bit happy over here and this and that and the other thing, while he proceeds to put his major emphasis, and he's putting it on small business and community banking and building the economy from the ground up. And if Bitcoin can be used as a tool in that alternative credit system, which is really taking the existing system and putting a different emphasis on it, as Bessent likes to say, Wall Street, you've had your run, you'll keep running, but the major impetus of the federal government is not going to be with you. It's going to be over here on the people providing credit to actual industry, credit to actually rebuilding the economy. And I think that's the way I look at Bitcoin at this point. I think that a lot of it was in reaction to the horrendous policies of the Fed. And I think, what's going on is that the Fed is going to be delimited in its new regime. It's going to have to sell off its balance sheets. It's going to have to stop supporting the euro-dollar market, stop supporting all this crap abroad. And it's got to be limited to setting interest rates and having the Treasury Department, which is where it's headed, take the major thrust of developing the economy. I think that's what where Trump is actually heading.
Thank you. And somebody sent in this one here. I think this is an interesting take because it's certainly having that effect. Could the push for AI and Bitcoin be related to the rebuilding of the U.S. electrical grid ahead of reshoring and manufacturing? Election is a bottleneck. I don't know if that was the intention, but it's certainly putting the issue of electricity on the front burner without a doubt.
And the administration is responding to it. I mean, they have the pedal to the metal, you know, in terms of bringing new electricity generation online. And of course, I think as people know, with a lot of these big data centers, this administration has said to the people building them, you've got to provide your own energy. You've got to build something right there on site, and any excess energy that you have, you can sell back onto the grid. So I think it's, as Adam said, whether it was intended or not, it's having definitely the effect of accelerating the production of more electricity and the power in the United States.
Yeah, on the data center side, that's becoming a big thing. A lot of localities won't even let them build a data center without putting a gas generator on site.
Yeah. A lot of them won't do it. They're saying you're going to
back up. Yeah, here I currently live in Northern Virginia. Our utility here, Dominion Energy, they put a stop. They wouldn't even take any more applications for data center. It only got lifted when they were able to get some more capacity online. So in this area, this is like the ground zero of the internet here in the United States. It's absolutely crazy, the amount of power that's being pushed through this area. So thank you very much, Eugene, for your comment there. Chadwick has a quick comment. I want to say truly great work and what you guys are doing. Seeing Susan on other shows really matters too. Saw you on Tommy and Rich's show with Tom Luongo. All they talk about is Promethean action and the American system when you're not even on. Thank you very much, Chad, for joining us every week. We really appreciate the support. Amy, another one. Do you all know why the British government supports what the Pakistanis are doing to young girls? I think Barbara has been looking into some of this. Any comments on this, Barbara?
Yeah, I think Alex Craner has some important insights, which he's actually putting together on this. And what he's claiming, and it really jars something in me in thinking about it, is that the Pakistani rape gangs are just part and parcel excuse me, of an entire criminal apparatus, which involves welfare fraud, government fraud, subsidies, and all sorts of things, which are used as a dark money conduit to fund intelligence operations. And what he's saying is that this goes back to Osama bin Laden and 9/11, which is pretty interesting. So that's a theory. And, you know, basically also, I think there's a great deal of complicity of actual British public officials in this particular operation. It's a little bit, when you think about Minneapolis and California and how that we're discovering that the Democratic Party is actually funded by a vast criminal enterprise. You begin to think about, okay, was this kind of model from Britain exported to the United States through the Democratic Party? And I think that's quite likely. And that what jarred in me was, you know, kind of an interesting side note, which is if you look at Russiagate and you look at where that came from in the Department of Justice, it came from, you know, the Bruce Orr and Nellie Orr, who are key culprits in this thing, actually were working in the multinational organized crime section of the DOJ with an emphasis on quote unquote Russian organized crime. Well, that's a very fertile subject because Russian organized crime actually got taken over by British intelligence and used against the Putin regime in Russia as an instrument. A very, very interesting construct. So that's what I'm looking at in terms of all of this. I have obviously a great deal of work to do to come to final conclusions, but that is sort of, wow, this is a really interesting insight that Alex had and very much worth thinking about and following up.
Thank you. Also, V. Sanderson, thank you for joining us. Make sure you get our free newsletter, links in the description, and also subscribe to our YouTube channel. Our next political update will be on Saturday. Thank you for joining us again. And 7272, thank you very much. Every bit helps. We are a reader and viewer supported operation. Thank you very much for the support. Okay, I'm going to switch over here. Actually, no, I'm not going to switch. I'm going to continue on the domestic economy question, because we did get a lot of questions on economic issues. Okay, so these next two are on a potential U.S. defaulting. If the U.S. defaulted on its bond debt, the U.S. could not acquire any future debt for the foreseeable future. What's the downside? Russia did it once and recovered. Thank you, Mark, for your question. And Clyde, every nation seems to be in debt. To whom are they in debt? Is it a foreign entity, a family, or a person? If one doesn't know, how can they get out of debt, and why is there interest on the debt? Thank you, Clyde, for your question. So Mark and Clyde, thank you very much. Barbara and Susan, your thoughts. Could the U.S. default on its debt? Should we do this?
Well, I'll take the first one. I really recommend that people go study what Alexander Hamilton did at the founding of our country. Remember, Hamilton wrote 3 really seminal reports: the report on public credit, the report on manufacturing, and the report on national banking. And the report on public credit addressed this question. We were in debt coming out of the American Revolution. And of course, it was like previous governments, like the Articles of Confederation or the Revolutionary War entities, which took on that debt. The British, being what they were, they ended up buying up a lot of that debt. So they basically had us by the throat. And there were people at the time who were saying, why don't we just default? This is held by our enemies, basically tell them to go to hell. And what Hamilton understood is that if you did that, it would severely damage your existence as a sovereign nation, because basically no one would want to buy your debt if you did that. And he did something really quite elegant. He essentially said to all those holders of U.S. debt, we want you to reinvest this in the National Bank of the United States. In other words, exchange whatever piece of paper you have for holdings in the National Bank of the United States. And then we will be able to pay you back. It may take us 10 years, but we will be able to pay you back. Otherwise, we're going to give you pennies on the dollar or something like that, because that's all we can do right now. And the way the National Bank was set up was to take that credit and issue it to grow the economy, to put the United States on a stable economic footing, build our infrastructure, build up our manufacturing, make us more independent and wealthy economically. And lo and behold, it worked. They were able to pay it back because Hamilton was able to basically, recycle that debt as a useful instrument of national credit that was used to grow the economy. And we did pay back people that we didn't like. But it was necessary to establish us as a serious sovereign nation. Now, it gets a little more, and I'll just say one other thing in terms of the second question. Russia did it, but the ruble is not the world's reserve currency. So, you can't really compare what the United States did, what might be possible for the United States to Russia. So I'll take that part of it. Barbara might want to answer the second part of it.
Well, I think fundamentally you have to think about a couple of things here. One is that the empire exists to turn countries into debt slaves. If you look at, for example, a lot of the development projects in the third world undertaken by the United States and the British, basically we controlled the economies of entire countries through the fact that they couldn't really pay the debt, and we were impoverishing them the whole time. There's a very famous essay out by someone who was doing this called Confessions of an Economic Hitman. And what he's talking about is exactly that kind of policy of, taking places that are fundamentally undeveloped, putting them in positions where to develop their populations, they've got to go into debt, and they've got to go into debt, and this is the key aspect of it, at truly usurious interest rates where they may repay the principal on the debt 50, 60, 70 times before they actually, satisfy the debt. That is a big problem in terms of international finance. It's something that I think Trump is beginning to tiptoe into when he's saying we should reduce credit card interest to 10%. All right. That is something we have to think about across the board. There used to be in every single state of the United States laws against usury. Basically the banks couldn't charge any more than 6, 7, 10% on loans because it was considered to be just prohibitively bad to put people in that position. And I think that's something we have to look at. Yeah, Russia recovered, but at what cost? That was, Russia was just looted to the bone. And it took them all of this time to actually come out of that. They suffered demographic collapse as a result of that looting operation by the British Empire, and unfortunately in collusion with the United States. So it's not really a good example.
And I'll just add one other thing apropos what Barbara said. We've often said some of this debt is illegitimate. The usurious side of this, the side of this which is based on uber speculation and so on. And at some point, there does need to be a actual reorganization of the debt where the legitimate debt that the United States has incurred because it is a sovereign nation and it has to take care of its people and it has to conduct business and so on is one thing. And then you have these mountains of private debt that these parasitical speculators have been engaged in. Or to quote Peter Navarro, who said the other day to Jamie Dimon, Jamie, you SOB, you are a usurious thief, so shut up and reduce your interest rates. I mean, that's definitely the right attitude toward a lot of these private bankers, but you can't just kind of burn it down. You have to be you have to use a scalpel when you go in there and actually deal with the debt question.
Thank you to everyone in the chat. Much love. I see the outpouring of support. Thank you so much. Bill Vickers, thank you for joining us again. World Family Legal Defense Fund, save the corgis.
There you go. The dogs are innocent. The dogs are innocent.
They are. All animals are innocent. Okay.
Particularly corgis.
So Thomas asked a super chat before. I think he just wants a little clarification. Right? I know this word nationalism, literally there are a few words that will cause people instant freak out in their minds. Could you ladies kindly explain to the audience the difference between nationalism and ultranationalism? Some folks are easily frightened.
Well, I actually prefer to use the word sovereignty rather than nationalism. I mean, this is not a problem. I was talking to somebody yesterday who had never heard of the American system. And she said, well, I've always used the word economic nationalism. I said, well, that's a good first step, but why don't we give it its brand name, which is the actual American system? And I think the important thing about our republic, about the American system, is that it's based on ideas. It's based on the principle that all men are created equal and endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights, and that our nation exists to protect that. But it's an idea, and it's not a race. And that's where I think people start to get a little scared. Because if all of a sudden you're over on the side of, oh, nationalism is just for white Christians, I don't think that is what our founding fathers intended. I think they intended for anybody who came to this country and wanted to participate in these profound principles and in our system of government as they constituted it was welcome. And to me, that's why I prefer to just talk about the American Republic and sovereignty rather than these somewhat emotion-laden words. And in some cases, they mean something which I actually don't agree with.
Adam, you're muted.
Thank you, Thomas. On Econ Ease thinks you're talking about implementing Glass-Steagall in your discussion about American debt. How does that fit into the situation?
Well, so far, the Trump administration has not actually gone to that particular instrument. It may happen, but that's going to be, I think, a little bit down the line in terms of their present thinking. Again, the issue is we're fighting an oligarchy which has enormous financial power, and we're fighting a financial system which has gone off the rails in many, many, many respects. And I think that, again, the measures which Scott Bessent is taking, are to gradually inflate our way out of that debt in a certain framework of rebuilding the country. So the usefulness of Glass-Steagall is to basically get back to saying to banks, the government will never bail you out, in essence, for your stupidities. I don't think the president, without Glass-Steagall, I think that the administration has made that pretty clear. They're not going to be bailouts like occurred under Obama, in 2008, which is why we fought so hard to get Glass-Steagall implemented at that point in time. It's a good framework, but I think they're choosing to go about it in other ways. They're trying to keep the lions off to the side rather than having a really direct confrontation when they're trying to fundamentally reshape the economy.
Yeah, and I'll just add, I think both our Treasury Secretary and the proposed Fed chairman have made very clear that they now see the Fed as having a different mission. It's not what had been exclusively the stabilization of the big banks by bailing them out ad infinitum, but rather the mission of the Fed and the federal economic policy is the physical economy, they say that directly, and household incomes. So that's a very different orientation. One person who I think noticed that was Christine Lagarde, the head of the European Central Bank, because the speech she gave to Munich last week was, oops, we're going to have to figure out how to bail out our own euro-denominated crap because we can't count on the United States to do that any longer. And I don't know if there's a direct relationship or not, but a couple of days later, she announced she's leaving the ECB early. So I think the bailout regime that the United States was the primary feeder of is very much over. But yeah, I agree with Barbara. Again, so many of these things, it's the principle of Glass-Steagall, whether it ends up being exactly the same thing you had in the middle of the 20th century for the middle of the 21st century. I'm not an expert on the multiplicity of financial instruments and how this modern system works and so on. I could probably talk about it fairly, competently in the 19th century. I can't talk about it in the 20th century. So what form these principles take in the 21st century is a challenging and an important discussion that people who have actual expertise in this, I hope, are engaged in.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for sending in super chats. I want to cover this next group of questions, though, because this is really important because we got a lot of questions like this next one here. So I'm going to read 3, 4, 5 questions together, but they're all kind of on the same thing. North Carolina's early voting started this week. My family and I are confused about our GOP U.S. Senate choices. President Trump endorsed Michael Whatley, but I'm reading good things about Don Brown. I was not impressed with Whatley as RNC co-chair. It seems like Laura Trump needed to jump in to help get Trump and other Republicans over the finish line. What is your opinion on voting for Trump's endorsed candidates? I'm leaning for voting on Whatley, but for no other reason than Trump endorsed him and he believes that he has a good chance of winning in a general election. Thank you, Joanne, for the question and comment. I'm currently living in Texas, and I want to know your opinion on the Senate race on which Republican candidate best represents Trump's agenda. Thank you, Christina. Reference, Nevada congressional race. Considering Mark Amodei has stated he will not run again, and the other listed Republican ran as a Democrat prior with minimal information available, is there a contact in Nevada I can talk to and work with to get the best candidate registered for the primaries? I had not wanted to be involved until now. Thanks for the clarity of the message and information backing it up. Thank you very much, John. And two more rather general questions, but we got so many of these kinds of questions this week. What can the average concerned citizen do to help the process? Thank you, Ted. And Kim, how can we fight back? What do we do? Barbara and Susan.
Well, let me take North Carolina and Nevada, and then Barbara can handle the rest. On North Carolina, your instinct is right. Look, Donald Trump is endorsing candidates based on a strategic overview, which is that we have to win. So sometimes there are candidates out there who seem attractive to the MAGA base, but Trump has looked at the on-the-ground situation. These guys do know what they're doing, and said, "Look, we have to win." Now, my approach in terms of pretty much every race that I've seen so far is if the president has endorsed them, that's the candidate you vote for. Because from that standpoint, in terms of Whatley per se, I am involved in the Republican Party. I'm an officer in the Michigan Republican Party. He did a fine job at the RNC. I don't know why somebody would say he didn't. He and Laura Trump worked, joined at the hip. And I have absolutely no problems there. So whatever you're hearing on that, I would ignore. In terms of the Nevada question, thank you. That is a very, very important task you've adopted for yourself, which is make sure we actually have a candidate and a good candidate. So what you can do is go to Promethean Action and send us a message. Just put the word Nevada in the message, and we will put you in touch with our people who have an overview in terms of Nevada. The other thing you may want to do is, Adam, if you want to pull up the Promethean PAC website for a moment. Oh, there we go. That's what I was going to do. We have a boot camp on Promethean PAC. Every 2 weeks, we do a live Zoom discussion on Promethean PAC with activists around the country to equip them with the tools they need to intervene effectively into the midterms, and to put you in touch with other people in your state, because we have people coming from absolutely everywhere. So if you go to the Promethean PAC website, Adam's put the URL up right there. Look up in the upper corner, you're going to see Midterm Boot Camp. Hit the drop down, you'll be able to sign up for the boot camp. So you can do either. You can reach out to Promethean Action with a message, or go to Promethean PAC and sign up for our boot camp. Thank you. Very important what you're trying to do.
Yeah, in terms of Texas, I'm going to stick with the instinct of the North Carolina person. From my MAGA standpoint, it seems to me that Ken Paxton is more truly MAGA than John Cornyn ever was. But, and there's a big but, can he win? And the president has not endorsed in that race yet. I don't know whether he will endorse prior to the primary. In other words, he may very well be looking to the citizens of Texas to actually grow up a little bit and make a decision for him by their vote. Right now, as I understand it, Paxton is leading, and that's despite the fact that the senatorial committee is firmly behind Cornyn. But that's in many ways a bunch of rhinos who normally support the incumbent. So I don't know what Trump's interaction with Cornyn has been. I think his voting record is pretty abysmal in terms of MAGA. But I also don't know what they've got on Paxton. It seems to me like they're pretty confident that they can submarine him with enough garbage from his past that it's going to severely hurt him. And I think the president's hesitancy on endorsing is an indication that you, the citizen out there, I got to really get into the process and really think it through. If Paxton wins, does he have the citizen army to actually overcome all the crap that has been thrown at him? And that, I think, is the issue before the Texan voters. It's also the issue of the midterms. Donald Trump is not on the ballot. And the only thing that I've been able to think through and think about is the enormous leverage he had coming out of 2024, out of all of the people who really hate him. They went along with him. The big, beautiful bill passed, despite these incredibly small margins in the Congress. Why? Because as opposed to Barack Obama saying, I'm going to stand between you and the pitchforks out there, Donald Trump has said, I'm going to represent the pitchforks out there. Essentially, it scared the hell out of the establishment because they didn't know what to do. And he had a tremendous amount of momentum. What I'm looking for in terms of the midterm is that kind of overwhelming vote by the citizens, not thinking necessarily about John J. Rhino, who's running in my district, but if the president endorsed him, I'm going for it. That gives Donald Trump leverage over that candidate. And to the extent that it's a huge leverage, like 2024 was, it basically paralyzes the opposition. So think about what you'd like to wake up with, because Donald Trump is going to be the issue. It's not going to be the candidates. The Democratic Party is going to run against Trump. So think about, in the midterms, waking up after the election on midterms and having the establishment press to admit, well, folks, despite everything we did here, there was another major triumph by this guy, and we don't understand what the hell is going on out there that causes this to happen. That's what my goal is for the midterms. And that's the way I think we got to start thinking about it.
Thank you, Barbara and Susan. And I'd also like to give everyone who tuned in today. Also, we got some more super chats here. People just sending in nonstop questions. Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, John. Thank you, Anthony, again. Thank you very much. Saving USA by Facts and Tenacity. Thank you very much for joining us, APL. Thank you very much. Cool Mom, thank you for joining us today. BSV, a little bit late today, but thank you for joining us every week. And Kat Cara, thank you very much. What if abolishing of the Fed was being done right before our eyes? As in, you see the shell, but it's a different product within. Keep it up, guys. Thank you very much, Kat. And thank you very much to everyone on Twitter and YouTube. I think this is going to end today's show. I have so many more questions. I could totally keep going, but we've already been going for 2 hours. Tune in again next Thursday at the same time, 11 a.m. Eastern, 8 a.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. UK time. And we hope to see you there. Thank you very much. Have a good weekend.